So our question repository is ready for us to use it. And next we need to look at the view model. But before we even do that, remember, we have to go back to our app module. Because this is where we register things and we create the providers. We need to provide, first we provided the question API, which is important. So now the entire application will have access to this. There is this dependency that we can get from anywhere really. But we also have to provide another dependency here. We have to provide a singleton, and at provides like such, just like what we did before, another function. What this function will be, well, it was going to provide the question repository like that. So what do we need for the question repository to work? Well, we need to pass the actual API, right? Because if you go back to our question repository here, we have to have this question API. We injected it, so that needs to be passed along. All right, so I'm going to say API, question API, and I'm going to just go ahead and set it to, and then this will then return a question repository and pass the API as such. So whenever this provide question repository is called, by the way, we're not going to call this directly. This all is going to be done in the background by hilt and dagger. That is the beauty. All this dependency, this app module will be connected when we run this application, when we build this application, right? It's going to create all the classes that it needs to connect all of these pieces together. All of that done for us. We don't have to do too much work. Now that we have created this provider here, we can now go to create because the view model is where we have the state of the application, all the variables, all of the data that is where it's converted into a state so that the user interface can then react to it, the composables and so forth. All right, so let's go ahead and create the actual view model. Let's go and get rid of all of these guys. We no longer need them. We may come back to them, of course. So the view model is going to, I like to put inside of our screens because this is where I add different screens. Okay, so let's create Kotlin class questions view model. So let us not forget that first of all, let's add the hilt view model annotation there. Okay, to signal that this is a hilt view model, which means we can also go ahead and inject in our constructor here. What do we need? Well, we're going to need the repository. I hope you're seeing the trend here. So I'm going to say private val repository. We call this question repository. Very good. And in our body, class body here, this is where we do the work. I need access to our data, which is our data exception there, which is this guy. Well, but difference here is that we are inside of a question view model, which means the idea is that this view model will be used directly in our user interface, in our composables. And our composables need to compose themselves, which means they need, yes, you guessed it, they need a state. So what that means, we have to wrap things again, which means here, I'm going to say val, our data now is going to be a mutable state type. And then I'm going to pass again the data or exception, just like we did before. Array list of long, I know, very long classes here. It's okay. Question item. And then we're going to pass a boolean and then an exception as such. And in the beginning, this is going to be an empty. And then I'm going to set up to say it's going to be a mutable state. Aha, and then here I'm going to pass the types that it's expecting. Well, it's going to be data or exception. I'm going to pass null in the beginning for the data because we don't have anything, right? No list of nothing. We're just instantiating this data object here. And for its loading, because we know that's the boolean we're going to pass for this data or exception in the beginning, I'm going to say true, it's loading. And exception, we're just going to create an empty constructor exception here that says nothing, like that. Close it all. I think I'm making a few mistakes here. I don't need to pass the Angular because I'm actually passing the object, instantiating the actual object here. Oh, my bad. Okay, I think there we go. Let's finalize. This is not mutable set. It has to be mutable state. That was the problem. Okay, there we go. All right, there we go. So what are we doing here again? Just to revise, we're creating a variable data, which is going to hold a mutable state, because remember, we are going to be using here composable. So composables need state. So we're wrapping our data exception, which remember has an array, question, a boolean, and exception. We're wrapping it with a mutable state because we need that state, right? So our composables can react to it and do what they need to do. And of course, we're just setting it to an empty object of data or exception here. So null for the data, the array list is going to be null in the beginning, and true for loading, and exception is going to be just an empty string exception like that. All right, there we go. So now we need to set up this data. We need to actually feed it the information, the data. So I'm going to create here a private function, and I'm going to say get all questions. And what this will do, first of all, we're going to pass a ViewModel scope like this. And it looks like we don't have access to our ViewModel scope. It may be because we are not. There we go. So my problem here was that I created this question ViewModel, but I didn't actually extend the ViewModel. That's why. So we need to extend the ViewModel like that and pass nothing into the constructor. That is very important. That's what was giving us that issue, because it makes sense. We want this question ViewModel to be of type ViewModel. Okay. So now if we come here, we're going to be able to say ViewModel scope and then say launch, right? We're launching our coroutine here. So first I'm going to go ahead and set the data.value. So we're going to go into our data loading and set that to true, because now at this point we are loading, right? And then I can say data.value again and invoke the, and then I can say data.value this guy here. Of course, we're going through this guy, and I'm going to set that to what? I'm going to say repository dot get all questions. So I'm setting up our data here to just get all the information we may be getting from our get all question, which knows how to go and get the information from our JSON API, right? And then I'm going to check here if data.value and .data. So I'm going into my data or exception, right? Array list, check there. If toString, I'm going to say toString, and is not empty, if that's true, then that means then I can say data.value that loading and set that to false, because we know that there's nothing happening, because now we know that the data, which means whatever we have inside of our data exception here, this list of question items, if it's not empty, that means we have something. So we're going to set the loading to false. So we are adding information to our metadata of our data exception object. All right, looks like we want to make this private because it's being used inside here. That's fine for now, at least. So because here we know that the question ViewModel is going to be called inside of a composable, or could be an activity as well, doesn't matter, because this is just a data section, a data layer. We can pass here an init block to say, okay, to initialize this question ViewModel. When this is first called, what is that we want to happen? Well, I'm just going to call the get all questions. Okay, so when this happens, we're just going to go ahead and call all get all questions, and then we should have that information, which means calls this and sets everything up as we went through. There we go. We have questions ViewModel set up, and it should be all good. So now that we have our ViewModel set up, that means we're ready to go up again to look at the user interface. So because we have our question ViewModel, it knows how to get that data from our repository, and our repository knows how to get our data from our questions API, or just a DAO, right? A data access object, really. And we're set. So we have this hierarchy here. That's very important. And most importantly, we made sure to add metadata to our class, right? So we created this data or exception and wrap it around the array list, which is really the data that we really want. But we also understand that we want to pass something else, like, is it loading? If it's yes, then we're going to say that it's true, so that later can get this metadata to check, okay, is it loading? Is it true? Then I'm going to show to the user that something is happening, if we choose to do so, right? But at least we have that infrastructure set up. Very well, so we're getting there. I know it's been a lot of setting up, but we don't see anything in the user interface, but this is what I wanted to show you. This is what I wanted to impart to you, how to really build a clean kind of architecture style application here. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.